This week on Motor Week, I take an early look at the new Daewoo Nibera. Phil Sayer tests the Nissan Primera, and Richard Hammond looks at the TVR range. Before Daewoo started to build cars, they were a little more at home with the deep blue sea. That's because they built ships. So when they decided to diversify from the sea to the land, they were faced with a problem. I mean, let's face it, the performance and handling of a large ship is somewhat different to what you expect from four wheels. So to woo the car buying public, they dazzled them with hassle-free car buying and superb levels of after-sales service. OK, the cars on offer were little more than tarted up old Vauxhalls, but it certainly worked. But now, 4 years on, it's a rather different story. Daewoo still offer the superb after-sales package, but the cars on sale are totally designed and built by Daewoo's own people. It all started 2 years ago when Daewoo surprised many people by launching not one, not two, but three totally new cars at once. They were the Nibera, the Lanos and the Leganza. Now, they weren't great cars, but they were cheap, they were economical, and they came with a great sales package, qualities that wooed plenty of buyers. And now, 2 years after the launch of those three vehicles, Daewoo say they've responded both to the market and also to comments from customers to produce this, the updated version of the Nibera. And what a cosmopolitan little car it is. It's been built in their factory in Korea, but it's been developed at Daewoo's technical facility in Worthing. It's been styled by some trendy Italians, and it's here in lovely Lisbon in Portugal for us to drive. Now, this kind of Mondeo type saloon might not look like the most exciting prospect to you, but remember, there are plenty of people out there for whom practicalities outweigh sheer driving pleasure. The Nibera's new look is most obvious from the front, where Daewoo's signature chrome grille is flanked by triangular headlamp clusters. There's a new V-shaped bonnet and a more angular rear with bigger tail lights and a reshaped boot that now features gas struts. The whole look is far sleeker and helps make the Nibera stand out on the road. Now, as you'll know, the fashion in the motor industry at the moment is to produce cute little city cars that are absolutely huge inside, a bit like Doctor Who's TARDIS. The Nibera, however, is quite the opposite. From the outside, it looks like a fair-sized family saloon. Once you get inside, it's quite a surprise. It's a lot smaller than you imagine, probably the size of an Astra or maybe the Focus. Doesn't seem to be quite sure what kind of car it is. However, having said that, you do get extremely high levels of specification no matter what model you buy. Things like dual airbags, air conditioning, power steering, central locking, there's a good stereo. Everything comes as standard. Now, the interior has had probably the most work on it. It's been completely redesigned and it is a very pleasant place to be. Everything is well laid out. The sort of aluminium look trim is very nice to look at, and there are plenty of cubby holes to store all your stuff in. So it's a kind of car that suits a practical buyer. But what a practical buyer really wants is a car that's undemanding to operate and virtually drives itself. Amongst you will be very pleased because the Nibera is easy to drive and you quickly feel at home behind the wheel. Unfortunately, it's also rather disappointing. This is the 2-litre CDX model, and although the press pack says that just like the 1.6, the engine has been refined, I've yet to find any signs of it. Although it's capable of a top speed of around 120 miles per hour and can get you from 0 to 60 in about 9 seconds, it feels rather sluggish and underpowered. The suspension is extremely hard, making for a rather fidgety ride. And as for the steering, well, it's a bit too vague for my liking. And things don't fare much better with the gearbox and the clutch. The clutch is spongy and the gearbox is rather notchy and can be hard to actually get into gear. The whole driving experience is rather uneventful. You're certainly not going to buy the Nibera for thrill and driving excitement. Now, don't get me wrong, this isn't a bad car. It just isn't the drive of your life. But owning one will help to keep your stress levels down. That's because Daewoo promise customers hassle-free showrooms, uniform trade-in prices right across the country, and you can also bank on low insurance and cheap servicing, which, by the way, is included for the first 3 years. All that means no headaches for you, the buyer. And if you aren't tempted by that package, then the prices will definitely keep you happy. This 2-litre CDX will set you back £13,225, although we reckon that the 1.6 engine, which isn't miles off the 2-litre in terms of performance, is a much better buy at just over 12 grand. And if states are your thing, then the 1.6 is £13,225 and the 2-litre version £14,225. Prices like that are bound to make the Nibera an attractive proposition for families looking for a practical saloon and also for the fleet buyer. The price is actually one of the most positive aspects about the Nibera, and that, together with the levels of customer care, that no worries 3-year warranty and the 3 years free servicing, are the things that will tempt you into a car that on its own is pretty unexciting.
The Nissan Primera was always a good car. Great ride, great handling, terrific chassis. Where it was criticised was for its styling. It was a bit bland. With this new Primera, Nissan have addressed that issue. They hope. Nissan say that they've made over 600 changes to the Primera range. Let's have a look at some of the more obvious ones. And we'll start at the front. This is much more purposeful and aggressive, I think, than the outgoing Nissan Primera. The flying wings are carried over from other members of the family, so to speak. And these headlights are xenon gas discharge lamps. They give up to double the amount of light of a conventional headlamp. You'll know when you see one coming towards you, it has a slight bluish-white tinge. Under the bonnet, as usual these days, it's a bit beyond the scope of the average DIY man, but everything that you need for that weekly check is easily to hand and it's neatly laid out. From the side, I think it looks not unlike a BMW 3 Series. Nice, neat and good-sized door mirrors. And this waistline is actually quite high, much higher than the old Primera. And the treatment along here actually gives the car a lower look than it deserves, in point of fact. The alloy wheels, I think, are absolutely superb. These spoked alloys, generally a very much better looking car than the outgoing Primera. These rear light clusters are not only good looking, they're also very functional, because over the lens is a kind of a protective screen here, which Nissan say withstands parking knocks of up to 5 miles an hour. Doesn't sound a lot, it actually is. They're tough. The overall appearance of the back is nice, a little bit of chrome to give it the upmarket approach. And how many people would you actually like to invite to the party that you're going to hold in the boot? It's enormous, and hidden away there in the corner is the CD auto changer on the top spec models. This, of course, is the 5-door hatchback, and I think overall it's fair to say they've cracked the problem. They've got a European-looking, good-looking Nissan. They say that they've worked very hard on the interior, and I have to say, full credit to them, it does show. This is a soft kind of textured plastic on the dashboard here, which gives it a very upmarket feel. The steering wheel is nice and fat and chunky and easy to hold. The in-car entertainment is right where it needs to be, and it is incidentally unique to the vehicle, which is an anti-theft plus. Some of the switchgear, I have to say, is a bit reminiscent of an early 80s Nissan Patrol. You get the feeling they must have bought too many of these switches and they're still kind of using them up. It doesn't seem to match with the rest of the car, but it's a tiny, tiny niggle. In front of the driver, almost inevitably these days, the black on white dials, but I must admit I do prefer them. Plenty of room for oddments, and where are the cup holders? Every car must have cup holders. Here they are. Underneath them is plenty of storage room for odds and ends, cassettes and CDs and your inevitable bits and pieces. Legroom has been increased over the old Primera, and they've done it in a rather interesting way. They've achieved, on the same chassis, remember, about 2 or 3 inches more legroom. Doesn't sound a lot until you actually sit in. But they've done it by sculpting the back of the front seat, and it's made the front seat no less comfortable, by the way, but plenty of room for your legs in the back. Available with the 2-litre engine is an automatic transmission option, and that's the big difference about this car. It's not a conventional automatic box, it's a CVT, which first made their appearance way back in the 1980s. Nissan believe they've now honed it so that it can take the power available from a big engine for a bigger car. Now, what makes it so different is that there is no feeling of any gear change for the simple reason there are no gears. The whole thing works on a steel belt system. The result of that is that in automatic mode it's very, very smooth indeed. You don't feel any changes. You can also, though, override that on this particular version of that gearbox called the M6, manual 6-speed, where it simulates 6 different gears. And all you have to do is to click the handle over and you can change up and change down just with a flick of the gear stick. The ride and handling for which the outgoing Primera was rightly praised is more or less retained because essentially this car is a facelift. It's built on the same chassis. That means that the steering is very, very direct, there's little or no body roll, even on quite fast corners, and it really is a delight to drive. The Primera will be built at the Sunderland plant, claimed to be one of the most efficient in the world, and it's purely for the European market. This car won't be sold in Japan or America. Although much of the engineering development was done in Japan, England and Germany are largely responsible for the ride and the design. They've chosen to launch this car in France, and why not? After all, Renault has just bought a substantial stake in Nissan. As for the vehicle itself, wisely they've left the chassis more or less alone. Rightly so, it's still a terrific driver's car. And with this new styling and some European input, I believe they've got a winner on their hands.
Fresh from the Euro NCAP results, which saw the Megane top its class in independent crash tests, Renault have topped the MPV class with the Espace. Overall, the MPV class only averaged a 35.6% score in the 40 mph frontal impact test, compared with 63.9% scored by the executive class tested previously. The top scoring Espace achieved 67%, with the front doors still opening normally. The major shock of the tests involved Chrysler's Voyager and GM's Sintra. Both fared particularly badly in the frontal impact test, the Chrysler scoring 0 for the frontal impact and a safety rating of only 2 stars overall. The Sintra, no longer available here, fared little better. The steering wheel broke off during the frontal test, leading to potential head injuries. In a sector which naturally appeals to safety-conscious family buyers, these results will obviously influence potential owners. Coming up in part 2, Richard Hammond and those TVRs.
Well, I had been told that as a special reward for having saved up all of my brownie points, the powers that be sent me somewhere interesting. So I'm here, north of Birmingham, and as yet, I've seen nothing interesting. Whoa, hold on, this is looking a little bit better. Chimera, Chimera, Cerberus, Cerbera. That's a lot of TVRs, and apparently there are even more inside. They're Britain's biggest car manufacturer. Now, who'd have thought it? And it's not often that you get in one place this many cars from one manufacturer. We are in TVR heaven. So let's start with this, the Chimera, the car that sold the best for TVR and really put the company on the map. This example is a 4.5 litre, V8, of course, what else? And it's flanked on either side by the 4 litre, hardly diminutive, and then at the very top, if you want to go completely nuts, there's a 5 litre V8. And it's not half bad on the inside either. The customary slaughter of an entire herd of cows has taken place to create this beautiful atmosphere in here. Hand-stitched leather absolutely everywhere, which you would pretty much expect in a car like this. And the thing that hits you is the custom feel to it, the fact that it feels like a quality interior. And that's largely helped by the fact that there's none of this nonsense of having switchgear that might have come from any run-of-the-mill family hatchback. In here, everything has been specially designed for the Chimera from the very start, and it works. There's sense in doing that. That's what gives it the quality feel. It's actually still, in many ways, the most practical TVR. There's an enormous boot back there. The hood stows neatly and conveniently. There's quite a lot of stowage space in here for all your kit, and there's plenty of legroom to stretch out. Admittedly, you can only get 2 people in it. But then, this is a sports car. What do you expect? And there are some nice touches, such as this. Hold on, darling, I'll just open your door for you. Julian, we know they're now the biggest British-owned manufacturer, but where exactly are TVR today? What are they about today?
TVR today, they're about a niche market. We supply to customers that want something a little bit different, they want something individual. We believe that TVR puts together a package that is just unbeatable in terms of price, performance, and it needs a lot of customer satisfaction from ourselves in terms of looking after our customers, because it's a hand-built car. Small problems do arise, but our customers put up with that because we do such a good job at looking after them.
Nevertheless, a lot of people are going to come here, visit your showroom, see the cars and say they're TVRs. They're plastic, they leak and they break down.
Yeah, I can understand that, and yes, we do have that a lot. But you can't compare a hand-built British sports car with a mass-produced German soft top or what have you. We believe that yes, they do have their problems and their shortfalls, but overall, pound for pound, they're exceptional value for money. They're just superb.
Isn't there something quintessentially British about having a sports car that presents you with that much fun, but also little niggles we quite like putting
Absolutely.
up with?
Our customers, they come in here and they'll sit down, have a cup of coffee, and they come in with niggles, but they enjoy the atmosphere, they enjoy the whole thing. It's just, it's really good. None of that puts our customers off.
Well, we've got everything in here, from Griffiths, Chimeras, right up to date with one of the latest cars from TVR, the mighty Cerbera. But where did all of this success start? Where does it come from? I can show you that. Back in the 80s, TVR were building these, the Tasman, and as you can see, the wedge was very much in fashion as far as they were concerned, razor-sharp edges everywhere. The problem was, they weren't selling them in any particularly great numbers. Mind you, today, this thing has got probably the funkiest interior you'll see on anything. Totally funky in here. This wheel is undoubtedly one of the nicest features I've seen on anything. And this red carpet, and the little tiny lever here for the brakes. And in the door, OK, the handle might be from a Marina, but this little bit of wood here is an actual bit of wood. You could snap that off and hit somebody's head with it, and it would hurt. It's the most 70s interior I think I've ever seen on a car. And that's the problem, because this was the 80s. That's not good news. When Peter Wheeler came along, he had something to say about that. He decided enough of this 70s retro nonsense and promptly went even more retro when he designed this, which harks straight back to the 60s with its more rounded, curvaceous and organic form. So he went from building a 70s car in the early 80s to building a 60s-inspired car in the late 80s. And then at the very beginning of the 1990s, things really took off. And they did so with this, the Griffith, first launched in 1990, first seen in fact here in Birmingham at the motor show of that year. And the orders flooded in. People couldn't get their checks onto the motor show stand fast enough. And just think about this. Back in 1990, this car would have set you back 25 grand. You could run it from then until now, and today it would be worth £19,995. How's that for residuals? In many ways, the TVR is a quintessentially British sports car. It's characterful, but it's actually quite discreet. Until that is, you get to something like this. Why?
This is a TVR Tuscan Racer from a one-make championship. It's a 450 brake horsepower vehicle, rear-wheel drive, a lot of fun. That's
a pretty serious race car, so we're talking about a pretty competitive and intense championship here. What's it like?
Very intense. There's about 40 runners this year, all competing at a very high level.
In terms of actual speed and performance, I'm told you're really getting there with these things. When they're not slow by any means, are they? What kind of speeds are you turning in?
Not at all. These cars are capable of approaching 200 miles an hour in right conditions and lap comparatively with touring cars at the same sort of circuits.
It's a tough life, but I'll cope. I've been told I can have the keys to any of these TVRs for the afternoon, and I've chosen this one. It's a TVR Cerbera, and it's the Speed 6, which is the new TVR-built straight six-cylinder engine. So I think we should go and play. Thank you. if it's outright performance you want from your TVR, then the Cerberus is undoubtedly the ultimate. You can tell that straight away because it's got a proper roof, it's not a ragtop. That adds to the structural stiffness of the car. And just looking at it, its long, low, lean stance, the size of the tyres, you know this is a car with serious purpose. Slip behind the wheel, it's a push button to start it, none of that newfangled key nonsense. Engine roars into life, depress the incredibly heavy competition-style clutch, real weight under your left foot, short travel. Blip the throttle gingerly, pull away, and it really is time to play. This is the Speed 6. It has a 6-cylinder straight 6 engine. Most TVRs, as we've said, are of course V8 with that lovely V8 burble. This has a noise all of its own. It's more of just a full-on, absolutely glorious bellow. It's a 4-litre engine, TVR's own. How many manufacturers of the size of TVR can boast making their own range of engines? Puts out about 350 brake horsepower and just limitless torque. It'll pull from just no revs at all. That engine, interestingly, is set a long way back under the engine bay, almost into the passenger cabin here. That's to give it as near a 50-50 weight distribution as possible. That coupled to the power going to the rear wheels, driving the proper end of the car, and you really have got a proper drive here. On the move, it's not as intimidating as it looks and sounds on paper. It's not a car you can jump in and drive around town like a Fiesta. It does take a little bit of getting used to the bulk. You're sitting low down, limited visibility out of the front. Once you've done that and acquainted yourself with it, it's a pussycat. The steering is incredibly direct and talkative, very predictable, which is just as well. The gearbox is slick. It rewards precision. It doesn't really reward being sloppy. You have to change gear on purpose, but you'd expect that. This is a performance car, that's what it's about. For £45,000, you are getting an extraordinarily fast car. I don't want to hand it back, but I've got to. My time's up. It's back to the shop for this one. Well, there's no denying it. I've enjoyed myself here at Team Central today, driving the TVRs, and incredibly, they've told me there is one car that is in my price range. All I've got to do is find it. It's got to be along the line somewhere. It's, oh.
On next week's show, Ian Royal looks at the Lexus IS200 and Richard Hammond seeks out a space large enough to stretch the legs of Audi's A6 Quattro Avant 4.2-litre V8.